Well, good morning, everyone, or you could be watching this in the afternoon. It's morning for us here at ONA. Welcome to the Nurse Planner webinar series. This is winter 2019, and we're excited that you are joining us this winter. So it's going to be a 6-week series, 7 if you come to a live question and answer. So you have from the time that we send you this, are we sending it to them on Thursdays? Is that what we're doing, Jessica?
Yes.
Yep. So you'll receive this on Thursday, and then we'll have a live question and answer the following Wednesday. So we hope that you're able to join us for those sessions. If not, we totally understand. We're all very busy, but that will be an opportunity for any questions that arise, anything that you want to share with us that you need more clarification on. We would love if you would have examples of how you've applied some of this in your work, and we look forward to having that time with you. So I am Kelly Schweitzer, the Director of Continuing Education here at ONA, and I'll introduce Jessica.
I'm Jessica Zubak. I'm a nurse planner here at ONA.
So here's our disclosures for our series. So obviously there's no conflict of interest for anyone for this activity. Your criteria for successful completion are to, actually we have attend or watch each webinar. That's a little bit of a change from last time. So I guess we can just change that to watch, and we will have a evaluation at the completion of this. And if you're watching this in an enduring format, you will be able to be awarded contact hours through January 30th of 2020. Here's our outcome. We are really hopeful that 100% of our nurse planners will be able to describe implementation of at least one standard of practice in their continuing education work. And we will go through different standards of practice each week. So this should be a likely outcome for everyone that's attending. We have several resources. So we put advertisement with this event that would be really beneficial to have a core curriculum and a scope and standards of practice. We have those sitting on our desks at all times. I was going to say we have them sitting here with us. We definitely have the scope and standards this morning. And then we also, as we were preparing for this, came across that there's a new edition of the Getting Started in Nursing Professional Development. So we have that here on our right-hand side as well. And I shared with Jessica that in the provider unit that I was involved in prior to coming to ONA, that was something our team lead bought for each of us. She had a copy for each of us when we first started. So you might want to think about that. The other thing that I came across with preparing for this session is this fabulous article by Jennifer, I'm probably going to butcher her name, I'm guessing Ragans. And it is just a great short overview of the NPD model. We're going to talk as we move throughout the series, your elevator speech, different ways to advocate for your specialty. And if you haven't studied too much your NPD practice model, this article gives you a short and sweet. I actually used this article when writing a recent thing to apply for DNP school. So it really helped me with just having the short and sweet of the model, what I wanted to advocate for in my writing. So just a great resource that I recommend.
Yeah, when I started here at ONA, Joe had the scope and standards and the core for me. And I, no lie, read the core like cover to cover, and it told me everything I needed to know. And it was a great starting point so that when I actually started doing the activities, it all kind of made sense. So if you don't have these books, we definitely recommend them. You will use them.
Exactly. Good point, Jessica. Yeah, we still use them because they're a great resource. And, reading something like the core from cover to cover, you're going to forget nuances. You're going to need to study things more in depth. And hence the reason for this webinar series. I know that when we did this in the past, we did one of these this summer. It really helps solidify for both of us and apply what we've been learning. So that's another thing too. As you're developing courses for maybe your nurse planners, if you're primary nurse planners, or creating your orientations, anything like that for your department, these are really great resources to have and use with that work. So the purpose of today's session is to lay the foundation. So obviously we've introduced ourselves, we've given you some goals, just an overview of what the course is going to contain. We are going to talk about our scope of practice as NPD practitioners and really advocate for the fact that NPD is a specialty. I think a lot of us, when we first get into quote unquote education work, we don't realize the specialty of it.
Right.
When we were bedside nurses, I was specialized in trauma. Jessica was in ER. And those are two quote unquote specialties of our profession that are easily recognizable. If you meet someone who's a trauma nurse, you kind of have in your head about what that means. If you meet someone who's an ER nurse, you have in your head what that means. But a lot of us, especially our bosses, just think that, hey, she was really great at the bedside. She'd be great in education. And so a lot of us came into our positions in education without really thinking about the fact that, hey, we needed to receive some education and support for this new specialty. So that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today.
Well, I think that's the whole thing. I mean, education is what most people think of it as, where it's nursing professional development. And it's so much bigger than just continuing education or orientation or whatever it is that you're focusing on. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people not in our specialty don't understand or don't know until we tell them.
Exactly. And I think the thing that's been really great with working with Jessica is she has started her master's, and she's receiving a master's that will prepare her better for her NPD practice work and actually become a specialist someday soon, because she'll finish her master's. She's working towards certification as well. And I was fortunate enough that when I went into my master's program, I really wanted to have a focus on what was then called staff development. So there are some that are in this work who might have received a master's in something else. And so now's the time to get more education towards your specialty. And that's the purpose of this webinar series. We're also going to talk about the ANCC primary accreditation within the ANCC framework. So we're going to give you an overview of what primary accreditation is and where we fit in. Some of you that are joining us this winter are in approved provider units, and some of you are nurse planners and submit individual activity applications to ONA. So whether or not that's the case, we're going to meet all of your needs, and you're going to learn more if you're an individual activity applicant about what it means to be a provider unit, and we'll give you some insight into whether or not you want to pursue that. So we're going to talk about the value of an approved provider unit, and we're also going to talk about your role as either a primary nurse planner or just nurse planner. I didn't mean to say the word just. I'm very guilty of that all the time. Don't call yourself just an educator or just a nurse. Let's try to get that out of our vocab. There was an article years ago, maybe not years ago, maybe a year ago. Make myself old by saying years ago. But anywho, there was an article by president of ANA about capitalizing the word nurse. And I've made that a habit. So, let's let that catch on. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of self-assessment to start out. So this is a tool I really advocate for when you're presenting continuing education, when you're starting an activity. And this just really helps you to see, are your outcomes being met? Has there been change as you have provided this education? So I'd like for you now to self-assess yourself about these 5 things. Are you able to, 1, explain the role and purpose of your approved provider unit, if that's applicable to you? Are you able to describe your role as a nurse planner? Can you explain how education has improved nursing practice or helped nurses grow?
Everyone should be able to check that one.
Let's hope so. And next is to describe the importance of certification in nursing professional development for nurse planners. So this is certification in nursing professional development. Can you describe the importance of that? Or do you need to develop these abilities? And if you need to develop these abilities, which one do you think is most important for you right now as you're sitting there at your desk? Or maybe in your car listening to this. So I'm a huge podcast fan and I listen to stuff in my car all the time. So that was kind of the purpose of us sending you guys these as a tape.
We're busy.
Yeah.
You're busy too.
Yes. Okay. Another thing we'd like for you to write down is, why are you here? What made you come or purchase this series? Did your boss make you? Did a friend say, hey, I went to this thing this summer, you should really do this too? So be thinking about, what do you want to accomplish over the next 6 weeks or 7? Write down your goals. It's really good to have an idea of what you want to accomplish. And then what do you want to learn today? So you came to this first session, it's about laying the foundation. So based on some of those ticklers we provided earlier, what do you want to learn today? And therefore, what is your goal for today? I know sometimes my goal for today is just to, get through the day. So
answer all of our emails,
all those calls back. But I think one of the things we often miss is our own professional development. So kudos to you for taking time for your own professional development. And maybe that's just your goal today, is that just taking time for yourself to actually listen to this, to maybe be undisturbed. Like I say, you can have this on your phone, put your headphones on and go for a walk. Like that could be a great goal to get a walk in. I know that that's something I often miss. So just think through those, take the time to write that down. You can stop the recording if needed, so you can be thinking through these questions and then come back and join us once you have answers to this. Please, please, please do yourself the service of taking the time to really be thoughtful right now and be thinking about what you want to accomplish. And then we would love to hear from you, either in the live question and answer, or you shoot us an email telling us how it went. Did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish? Did you meet your goals for that day? Sharing your goals with us. We'd love to have maybe a word cloud of different goals that people had throughout the series. That'd be a really neat thing to share at the end of the 7 weeks.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
So we'll share our emails with you, and that will probably be on the invite for this. As we send it out to you, you'll actually have Jessica's email, so it'd be more than fine to just respond to her email with that. So first of all, let's just talk about nursing professional development. So like I say, a lot of us, our titles are educator, CE might be something in your title as well. You might have something as far as having an education department, and maybe it's interprofessional. And that's all fine. But I'm a huge advocate of, if you can, to get NPD practitioner or specialist in either your job title or maybe your requirements for your job, maybe somewhere in your job description. And why is that? Well, it's because it's a specialty practice recognized by ANA. Think about a CNS or a nurse practitioner. Those are titles that are very specialized. People have an idea of what that means when they come across that title. They think about the outputs of what that person is going to be able to accomplish.
Their value. It helps convey that without even saying anything. If you have whatever certification title, it just adds a little bit of value to those that maybe don't know all that you do. And this kind of helps to share that, I think, in an easy way.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about why the title of just educator might limit what people see, and maybe even yourself realizing once you come through this week and you realize, like, wait, these are all things that my specialty advocates for me doing and that I should be doing and that I am doing. Sometimes too, I think a lot of times as quote unquote educators, we don't realize all the pieces and parts of that. We think about the classes, right? A lot of us think about, how many classes have I had, or am I developing this class, or, how many learners did I engage with? But there's things that you do to get to that space of the learning space that aren't all in a classroom or on a webinar. As we talked about earlier, there is a scope and standards for nursing professional development. It's a tiny little book, but it's meaty. And it's one of those books too, like I said, you're not going to memorize this thing, and you're not going to remember every piece and part probably, unless you have one of those minds that I don't have, where you can read something in photographic memory or whatever you call that. But it is something good to have at your desk. And we're going to be talking through some of those scope and standards as we go through these. The other thing too is to recognize that there's a specialty certification exam offered by ANCC for nursing professional development. So if you noticed in my signature line, it says RN-BC, that means board certified. And what my certification is in nursing professional development. To get more information about the requirements to sit for that exam and how you go about registering for that exam, there's the web address there. Those of you who might have been doing this work for a while and might have certification in something other than NPD, really going to advocate for having either a second certification, or if your other certification is coming up for renewal and you're trying to decide, do I want to renew that or do I want to become NPD certified? I'm really going to advocate for becoming NPD certified. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is that our certification relates to what our specialty is, right? So you might have been certified in critical care, certified in med-surg or whatever, but now you're in the space of nursing professional development. So it's important to receive continuing education, to be advocating for your specialty, and also to recognize what certification does for you within your specialty. So certification says you're competent with all of these scopes and standards, right? And I just really am a big advocate for certifying in your specialty. So we're going to talk a little bit about our specialty organization now. So both Jessica and I really value being a member of a professional organization. Jessica, you became a member of ONA early in your career, didn't you?
Yeah, when I first moved to Ohio, I had been a member of my previous state's organization. And so I signed up for ONA pretty much as soon as I started working in Ohio. And I hadn't been a member of anything else for a while. When I became doing emergency nursing for a while, I joined ENA. And then almost as soon as I started this job, Pam actually is the one who was telling me about ANPD and really encouraged me to join. And I'm so glad that I did. Just the resources that we get just in our email inbox is great. And the, networking and connections. And I was fortunate enough to go to their convention in 2018. And it was just wonderful. So much information, so many amazing people that really are passionate about this specialty. And so it's nice to be a part of a community that everyone is on the same page and really believes in the same goals. These are just really cool people to learn from. So definitely all nursing organizations have amazing value, but this one I think is pretty unique.
Right. So, we both work at ONA. We both value professional organizations. We're both members of ONA, but we're also members of our specialty organization. And what do you get when you're a member of a specialty organization? Well, you get access to amazing continuing education. You get access to boards that you can post questions on. And it's amazing how quickly people get back to you with their advice. A lot of us, work smarter, not harder, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you have a question such as, we've been investigating LMSs, learning management systems. So send a question out onto the board, onto one of those discussion boards, and received really valuable information. Also, with being a member of a professional organization, you're advocating for your specialty. And, here at ONA, we advocate for nurses across the state. At ANPD, advocating for us as a specialty, the importance of what we do, really great insight, an awesome journal that you have access to. Oh my gosh, my brain just...
Journal for Nurses and Professional Development.
Journal for Nurses and Professional Development. Oh my gosh. So all of a sudden I had Jonah on my mind. I'm like, no. That's not the right one. It's JNPD. So just look into that, be thinking about that, make that a goal for yourself maybe to become a member of ANPD. And then, like we said earlier, are you certified in nursing professional development? And like I said, some of you who are new to nursing professional development, you might not yet have the qualifications to sit. Some of you are thinking, well, I'm already certified. Well, are you certified in your current specialty? And I'm not saying that, if you are the quote unquote educator of critical care, that it's not important to have your critical care certification. I'm saying yes, and.
Right. We obviously see the merit and value in all certifications. And, if you are an expert in your field, then you should have that credential, of course. This is just another thing that we want you to do because you're an expert in this field. And I believe the qualifications are a certain number of hours that you have to work in NPD. And
I think it's the equivalent of like 2 full-time years.
I think it's 2 full-time years. I don't believe you don't need a graduate degree to sit for it. So in another year, I will be eligible to sit for it. So.
Yeah, and then it's so many hours of continuing education related to nursing professional development. So this counts. This counts. So also for those of you who might be up for recertification, these hours will count. Because within those 5 years that you're certified, you have to have so many hours in order to recertify. So I think we've made it clear that we want you to be certified in nursing professional development. And then, like we said, be asking yourself, okay, I'm certified in another specialty. Do I need to maintain that? What does that look like moving forward? I was never certified prior to NPD certification. I had been at the bedside for a long time, but I stayed contingent for many years, so I could never qualify. So that was part of the issue. And then I spent most of my career in NPD. So, but those of you might have different stories. So this is my favorite thing. I am such a nerd when it comes to this model. So I know I didn't prepare you for it. I just clicked and there it is. And you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, what has she done? What is this thing?
But it's actually really cool once you understand it.
Exactly. So if you are not a theory model person, I totally get it. I understand sometimes these things, it's a lot on one piece of paper and it's hard to get your brain wrapped around it. But we're going to talk through it. And I'm going to have my little cheat sheet here, which is this fabulous article that we told you about earlier from Jennifer Reigans on the NPD model. She just really does a really nice job of providing an overview of this model, very concise. I do also want to let you know if you ever have a chance to hear Mary Harper speak on this. Mary Harper and Patsy Maloney are the authors of this model, and they do an amazing job describing it, advocating for it, talking about how they came to develop it. I was like a little kid at Christmas the first time I ever saw this presented, and Mary actually came up to me after her presentation and said, it was such a joy to present to you because you had this big smile on your face. So I'm always aware of being a good learner, even if it's boring, just sit there and smile because
smile and nod.
Yes, smile and nod. That's the hardest thing about doing a webinar. No one is smiling and nodding. And that's why Jessica and I work together on these things, because at least we're smiling and nodding at each other. So anywho, let's get started. So within this model, there's a description of the environment, and that's the where it occurs. So currently for today, our environment is a webinar environment, right? And so your learning environment might be in your community. It might be one-on-one with a particular learner. It might be in the classroom. There's very many different options for where that environment might occur. That environment is also an interprofessional space. So this might be nurses along with physicians, pharmacists, those kinds of things. Let me just pause for a moment and talk about the word intraprofessional. So a lot of us get confused on interdisciplinary versus interprofessional, and there's starting to be more clarity in the literature, but you know how once something gets defined, sometimes it takes a good 10 years for everybody to catch up. So interprofessionals, nursing is a profession, pharmacy is a profession, social work is a profession. So that's the term interprofessional. Interdisciplinary is the disciplines within your own profession. So interdisciplinary education would be when you have a ER nurse with a critical care nurse and a med-surg nurse all together in the same space. So that's interdisciplinary. And this is one of those things too that, like, if you can talk about this with your colleagues and get some clarity around the definition, it really makes me happy. I'm a real nerd when it comes to that definition, how you do your professional credentials, And the
You
word,
taught me that.
yes, and the word continuing nursing education, continuing education versus CEU. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
CEU, it makes us cringe a little bit.
So those of you who are like, what are you people talking about? It's CEU. No, not in nursing. It is for our friends in social work and speech, and there's probably other ones, but I know those two for sure. And we do a lot of interprofessional education. I remember I was neuro for years. We do tons of interprofessional education with our friends in speech. A lot of times it's awesome to have interprofessional education with social workers because they are amazing at discharge, right? And that's a huge need in our profession, right? But CEU is 10 contact hours for one CEU.
In nursing.
In all of them. That's the unit of measurement. So you need to stop the CEU talk and just get to continuing nursing education. So yeah, that's enough about that. So I've totally diverged from our talk of the nursing professional development model, but I've told you my little things I have about different words. So, and a linguist I am not, but those three things,
yeah.
Interprofessional, CEU, and how do you do your professional credentials, those are my things. So anywho.
Maybe you should tell everyone how to do their professional credentials in 30 seconds.
Yeah, so your professional credentials, what can never be taken from you is closest to your name, your education. So for me, my master's degree can never be taken from me, and I don't feel a need to have BSN and MSN. I know some folks do that, and that's completely fine, but I keep my MSN close to my name. Then your next one is your licensure. So, your licensure can be removed way before your education ever can, because no matter what happens to you with your licensure, they can't take away your education, correct? Then the last thing is your certification, because that's going to be like the first thing to drop off, right? So anything that's going to drop off is furthest from your name. Those things that are yours for forever are closest to your name. So hence Kelly Schweitzer, MSN, RN -BC.
It was super helpful when you told me that. So I just thought there might be some folks that didn't understand it that way. I think it's the simplest, easiest way to remember it.
If you ever need education on cousins and second cousins and first cousins once removed, I can also do that, but we won't talk about that today. So the model inputs. So who are the inputs? The learners and the NPD practitioner. How do we find out what we need to do as NPD practitioners without being engaged with our learners, right? So I love the Venn diagram there with the learner, the NPD practitioner, and in the middle is the practice gap, correct? So this is where that NPD practitioner is constantly scanning the learning environment. So NPDs might find input from journals, from learners, from stakeholders, from quality data, from just maybe it's the environment itself, that learning environment itself. So those are the different inputs. Sometimes your learners come to you and say, I just really don't know how to do X, or I've never learned about X. And then sometimes it comes from boards of nursing will sometimes identify new laws, regulations, those kinds of things.
It could be an observation. It could be something you're walking down the hall in one of the units and you notice a gap there, and it could be something that simple.
Yep. And so the importance is to, once you are looking around, you're doing your environmental scanning, then deciding, is this needed? Is this an education need for our learners, for who I'm engaged with? You might see something new in the literature, but it's outside the scope of what your institution does. So it might not be a gap for your learners. Also, it might be something that you don't realize that, like, hey, I thought everybody knew this. I thought everybody knew EBP. Now, once you start asking questions, maybe you assess competencies, those kinds of things, you realize, no, this is an education need. So there's our inputs. And the win of NPD practice is anytime. And so it's really important to have a thorough assessment, to really be thinking through as you have those inputs into there. So once needs are identified, then the throughputs are through our standards of NPD practice. And then that outer wheel there are there's the roles over here to the left, which is the what. And also the cogs in the wheel, so the onboarding, competency, education are also the what, and then the standards are the how. So the standards in the middle are how we do things. So those are there's 7 standards, that we're going to be talking about more thoroughly as we go throughout these weeks. And then the what is the MPD responsibilities, which are onboarding, competency, education, role development, collaboration, research. And also then your different roles within that. So see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So facilitator, change agent, mentor, leader, champion for scientific inquiry, advocate for the MPD specialty, and partner for practice transitions. So when you think about a particular problem, so for example, my learners where I was at had a need related to skin. So we had quality data that was showing that we were having high incidences of hospital-acquired pressure ulcers, pressure injuries. It went from happy to happy, I know. So I was looking around and I'm like, okay, we have turn schedules. We have awesome beds. We have wound ostomy nurses, but we're still having problems. And so then I went to the literature and did an EBP project. And so for that, I was, I then became a change agent, I guess you could say, was my role, because looking at the literature, we found that silicone dressings used for prevention of pressure injury would actually reduce your pressure injury a ton. Like it's amazing. But if you haven't heard of this, look at it. It's amazing. So that required going to stakeholders, being a change agent. I also was a leader in leading that project. And then what was the output? So the output, look at this. This is really cool. You see these arrows over here, the learning, the change, the professional role, competence, and growth, which leads to optimal care and health. So once I found out that, okay, these dressings were awesome and we needed to implement this, then there was a whole work of how you implement that. So I had to teach, right? I had to teach my friends, my colleagues, other nurses within the institution about these dressings, advocate for these dressings. This led to a practice change within our organization. It led to changes in our policies and procedures. It led to changes in how we order things, how we do things. And then it also led to professional role, competence, and growth. So with all that education, we also, did a lot with staging, different things like that, which ultimately led to optimal care and health of our patients because we reduced our pressure injuries so much that our patients were having much better outcomes. I've always said, I can't imagine surviving my stroke, surviving a myocardial infarction, something like that, to then have a stage 4 pressure ulcer. So hopefully that example was helpful and that you take the time to read through this fabulous article and take the time to maybe look at, there's some work in the scope and standards of practice through this. It's highlighted in the core curriculum. So I had a copy of this at my desk at all times in my previous job. We don't have a lot of wall space here. But as you see, I have copyright to share this with you. And that's super easy to get. You just go to the AMPD website and you can purchase the copyright. If it's hard to find, you can shoot an email to Mary or Patsy, and their emails are there. Patsy is the president of AMPD, and Mary Harper is the executive director. And then you too can share this with your colleagues, have a copy on your wall or whatever it is. And just be thinking through this. And it really helps you too when you talk about who you are. We're going to discuss a little bit later your elevator speech. And it just highlights all those things that you do that are outside of quote unquote education. Like when you think about role development, collaborative partnerships, like how you advocate for nursing within your institution with other partners, research, EBP, QI. As MPD practitioners, we're involved with all of those. Maybe we're not conducting research per se, some of us maybe, But a lot of us are looking to the research to discern what is evidence-based practice or what do we need to be doing in our QI work. We also are involved with onboarding and orientation. Some of you sit in human resource departments rather than education departments. And you can see a lot of that you bring a lot to the table as far as onboarding and orientation. And then also competency, measuring competency, assessing competency. That's not just education. So hopefully that was helpful.
I think it's cool to share this with your department because I'm sure you'll find that you're already doing a lot of things on this infographic, and you're probably already fulfilling a lot of those roles and maybe didn't realize that you're wearing all of those hats. And this, like Kelly said, kind of shows that in a nice, pretty way. I'm a nerd too, so I really like this because it does show all the things that we do, and we know that there's some people that don't know what we do. And so here you go. This is what we do.
That's right. I do much more than just conduct classes. And I think too, I'm sure all of you have had this struggle with somebody coming to you with this class that has a bow on it and wanting you to work contact hours for it. And
it's required, right?
Yeah. So I think this model alone would help you with that discussion of a nurse needs to be involved, and here's why, and here's what we do. And I'm not saying that maybe they haven't assessed a gap. I'm not saying that. A lot of times our colleagues are the ones that bring gaps to us and we further investigate. But just thinking through, no, we need to work together with our learners, and it's really important. And my specialty is an NPD practitioner that I'm involved in that work in the beginning. And here's some of the reasons why. So let's drill down. Let's talk about some definitions for those of you who are like, wait, am I generalist? You mentioned specialist, practitioner. So here's the differentiation between these three things. Okay, so all of us who are doing nursing professional development work can call ourselves NPD practitioners. So this is a nurse who influences professional role competence and professional growth of learners in a variety of settings. So those of you with CE companies out there, those of you submitting individual activity applications as nurse planners, those of you in large provider units and education units, all could have the title of nursing professional development practitioner. And then ANPD breaks that down into generalist and specialist. So a generalist is either a bachelor's prepared nurse with or without NPD certification, or a graduate level nurse without NPD certification. So therefore, the specialist is a graduate level prepared nurse with a minimum bachelor's degree. So they understand that some of us might have a BSN, but then they went on to an education master's or PhD. You just need to have a graduate level. It does not have to be an MSN, but you at least have to have a minimum of a BSN in nursing, and you have NPD certification. So this really relates well to the qualifications for nurse planners, because all nurse planners have to have the minimum of a baccalaureate degree. You might have a master's or a doctorate in something else, but the minimum of a baccalaureate degree. So hopefully that was helpful. By the way, please know you can share slides like this. We don't have a problem with that. Just you cannot share the one with the the practice model without you yourself going and getting copyright protection. But I'm totally fine with you sharing any of these other slides. Okay, so we're going to talk about standards of practice. And our standards of practice kind of are like this stair step here. So assessing practice gaps, identifying learning needs, identifying outcomes. Then you have a plan, you implement, and you evaluate. So we are going to do an overview today, and we'll get more in the down and dirty as we go through each of these. So let's get started here with this. So let's talk about our standards of professional performance. So ethics. A great example of that is myself not taking that model and just sharing it with you without paying for the copyright, right? So I think a lot of us, when we think about ethics, we think a lot about bedside ethics, but
we have it too.
Think about plagiarizing. Yeah,
it takes time to develop education, and if you don't have a hint of ethics in you, then it could be really tempting to copy some images, take some text, but that's just not what a good person would do, but especially an NPD practitioner. Copyright and plagiarism are really, really important things, and it's confusing. There's a lot of copyright details, and one of the books, the legal aspects book that AMPD put out, talks a lot about some of those ethical things in copyright, and it was really interesting because it breaks it down and all the different stipulations there. So that's another possible resource if that's something that's interesting.
Yeah, and there's a great short webinar that AMPD offers about copyright as well. I really recommend. You might notice that all of our images come from Pixabay. So that's an open source source you have. I still have put the link to that on there. Yeah. Also, too, if you want to use it yourself, it's easy to find when somebody does that for you. So that's one standard of professional performance. I really love the fact, too, that we need to collaborate with other folks. We are not in our bubbles, in our offices with the door closed, developing
I did that at the old office.
But you know what I mean? Like you're searching for content experts, right? We get asked, we can assess gaps that are way outside of our domain of being able to educate folks well on. So real advocate for collaborating with others within your profession. Maybe you need to advocate to collaborate with others outside of your profession. For example, maybe your job is educating nurse practitioners and you yourself are not a nurse practitioner and you aren't aware of how to prescribe. Maybe you need to get with a physician colleague about prescribing opioids or whatever it is that you've assessed a gap for. I think another thing too that I'm really, really big on is evidence-based practice and research. So you will find that within our specialty, within our scope and standards, are competencies related to EBP. And really the thing to be really thinking about is the difference between EBP, QI, and research. When are each of those needed? And what's your competency level look like in relation to EBP, QI, and research? We have a short webinar about that topic, and I know AMPD does as well, and they're actually developing more. So I would look at the core, at the scope and standards related to that, if that's a weakness for you. I know for me, I received my master's almost 20 years ago now. We weren't talking about EBP back then. Melnick's work wasn't written yet, so if this is something that you lack in, or that you think EBP is the one article and that's enough evidence, please get some education. We also have quality within our NPD practice. This is a lot about what we do here and what you do as nurse planners. It is really important to adhere to accreditation criteria, which align beautifully with NPD practice. And also, maybe you're a change agent. Maybe you need to be about change management, looking at different theories of change. That's one thing that's always constant, right? Change. So that's just a little overview of some of our standards of professional performance. We're going to go into depth about some of these and not so much about the others. While I'm a huge advocate for mentoring, and that's hopefully what we're accomplishing through this, we're not going to talk about mentoring theory or anything like that, but that's just that in a nutshell. So please let us know if you have any specific questions. What I don't know, what I forgot to research prior to starting this series, is if these books are available through OhioLink or elsewise, these AMPD books, but I don't think they are. I think I looked at one point and it wasn't. So,
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so maybe it might be in your next budget to purchase these books. Another thing I'm a huge advocate for, and you might not have ever thought about this, if you are an institution that has a library, you can request for your library to buy them. And that might be a really good way to go about getting these titles for your department, is just purchasing copies through the library. I know we would do that a lot. So now we're going to talk about ANCC and their different ways of, the different things that they do. So the American Nurse Credentialing Center has a certification arm. And that's an individual credential. So that is certification in an NPD practice. They also have magnet designation, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and that's an organizational credential, as well as the pathway to excellence designation, which is becoming more popular and gaining more steam lately. So there's different criteria for each of those. Both are great ways to highlight what your organization is doing, and both of those also, I just totally blanked on the word, but both of those advocate for nursing excellence and also show the public that you have received an organizational credential that means nursing excellence. And then accreditation, so is an organizational credential as well. And this is where, if you're one of the provider units, this is kind of the umbrella that you fall under. So ONA is accredited as an approver and a provider of education. So today, this particular webinar series is through our accredited provider unit. Mm-hmm. All the other work that we do as far as working with our approved provider units and our individual activity applicants are because we're an accredited approver. So we have received the designation from ANCC to be able to not only provide education, but we can also approve education. That being said, when you are an approved provider unit, you are not allowed to approve education. You are providing, you are a provider. And I think that would be a really good thing to talk about more as well on the question and answer session, about where those lines tend to get blurred and how to communicate with others that you're a provider and not an approver.
And the language, I think, can get confusing sometimes too for provider units, and they say, my activity was approved. If you're a provider unit, you don't have to go through the quote approval because you have the credential to provide it.
You're already approved.
You're already approved.
Yes. So to make it easy to be thinking about, I approve you. ONA approves approved provider units to go out and give education. Once that's done, once you've submitted that application and you've gotten the nice little sentence that says Organization X is approved as a provider of continuing nursing education, you go out and provide as much education as you want. You don't need to have anything approved for those 3 years, okay? And so a lot of times people will say they've submitted an application to their primary nurse planner. Well, that's approverish language. You don't want to do that. You maybe have an activity doc, and maybe you have some kind of system in your provider unit where activity docs are reviewed prior to the providing, because maybe you're a new nurse planner, or maybe there were some things that happened in your last approval that some deficiencies noted. You want to make sure all your ducks in a row as far as disclosures or outcomes or whatever that is. But there shouldn't be any submitting. There shouldn't be the word approval. Now, those of you that are individual activity applicants, this is where it gets confusing. Yeah. Those of you that are individual activity applicants, everything you do has to come to ONA for approval. So your statement on the bottom of your activities say, this continuing nursing education was approved by ONA. So there's a big difference. And so that is one of the advantages of becoming an approved provider unit, because every activity doesn't have to be approved individually. Now, one of the things that is not an advantage of being an approved provider unit is you're bound by that geographic boundary. You can go to our website to look at more of that. But those of you who are individual activity applicants, once you're approved for 2 years. You can give it anywhere in the country, anywhere you want, however many times you want. And those that are in approved provider units, you are able to provide education within your as long as over 50% of your activities are within your geographic boundary. You can provide as many activities as you want to those learners. So hopefully that's clear. If you need some more clarification on that, this is all written out for you on ONA's website, www.ohnurses.org. Look under the education, and you can look through the individual activity applicants, as opposed to the approved provider, and all of that language that we just said is pretty clear on there. So under that accreditation framework, there is primary accreditation, which is what we just described. So that's providers and approvers. They're now at the national level is also joint interprofessional education. So there are organizations who, because of their ANCC accreditation to provide interprofessionally, they can provide education to nurses, pharmacists, and physicians. Another accreditation that many organizations go for is the Practice Transition Accreditation Program. I'm a huge advocate for this. So those of you out there who have residency programs or are thinking of developing a residency program, I super encourage you to go to the PTAP website and look at what the standards are for a PTAP program and develop your program around that. Or maybe you need to evaluate your program and see, is it meeting that criteria? National accreditation criteria, why is that important to me? It's a standard. There's no guesswork.
Quality.
It's the advocating for quality. Exactly, Jessica. Yeah. The other piece is the Nursing Skills Competency Program. So some of you have different software, different organizations that you work with. I know like the Donna Wright model, different things. So you might want to also look to that accreditation through the Nursing Skills Competency Program if you're already using those. I'm not sure about all those different products. I believe Elsevier has a product. I believe Lippincott has a product. I don't know the nuances of those. I did not come from an organization that used those, but you might want to go and look at accreditation. So when you go to nursingworld.org, there's different, it almost reminds me of like Polaroid pictures, the way they have their website set up. It's these squares, and just go down to the accreditation square, and then you can get more information about each one of those.
And we'll be adding a webinar with the PTAP group in the next month or so. So
yes,
depending on when you're watching this, just check our CE for Nurses website, and that should be available.
And I believe we're offering it free to anyone who already registered for this.
Yes.
Yes, so you will get that.
I should get an email from me about that. But on the off chance that you're listening to this and not, just go ahead and check or email me.
Yes, exactly. If you're listening to this in an enduring format, please contact us and we can get that to you. The other thing, just to put a bug in your ear, is that we will have more information about our nursing professional development conference this fall, and we're going to have some speakers talking about PTAP. So here's where all that I said earlier, here it is on a beautiful diagram. So we get to repeat ourselves a little bit. And so there's Commission on Accreditation. Let's talk about those folks for a minute. So ANCC itself, like the people who work at ANCC, they are not the ones that approve us. It's this other commission of really, people who've been in this work for a long time, who work together, who review the applications that are sent by the accredited approvers and providers. Pam Dickerson, who many of you may know from her work, Everywhere. She's one of the editors of the core curriculum. She's well published in the Journal for Nursing Professional Development. Luckily, she lives in Ohio and loves Ohio Nurses Association and Jessica and I. And so she was really instrumental in our orientation. And we have the opportunity to talk to her regularly. She's on the commission. There's other folks too. So the commission itself accredits providers and approvers. So an accredited provider can plan, implement, evaluate educational activities and award contact hours, as can an approved provider unit that is approved under an accredited approver. The same is true for individual activity applicants. So there's two different sides of this. Either you're on the accredited provider side, which if you're an accredited provider, you're probably not listening to this. And then the accredited approver side. So the individual activity applicants and then our approved provider units. So those of you who are in approved provider units, that your provider unit is growing. Maybe you're part of a system that now has acquired hospitals in different states. You probably want to give me a call about becoming an accredited provider, because I've transitioned several folks to, hey, you now need to apply at the national level and we can work together on your renewal date and things like that. Believe it or not, the application is the same. Like and some of the terminology changes. But if you're doing the work and you need more of a national accreditation, I will help you navigate through that.
We can help you with the application part. It seems overwhelming, but when you talk through it, you realize it's things that you're probably already doing, and it's figuring out how to verbalize that, and that's what we're here for. So if you have questions, definitely shoot Kelly an email. We can help you through this process. I think it really is worth it in the end to go through this extra step.
Yeah. And then the individual activity applicants, same thing. Those of you who are submitted multiple individual activity applicants and you're there in one geographic area, more than 50% of your audience is within that geographic area, we can talk about you becoming an approved provider unit. And those of you who are individual activity applicants who are all over the country or have webinars available all over the country, we can discuss the steps needed to become an accredited provider as well and help you navigate that space as well. It's a lot of what I love about my job is that we can help folks within these spaces. And what we're going to be talking about through the majority of the rest of these weeks is this planning, implementing, evaluating educational activities. Like I said, today is the foundation. So you're probably listening to this thinking, well, if this is all new terminology, please, please, please don't be overwhelmed. Maybe you're new to your role as either a nurse planner or a primary nurse planner.
These are in there.
Yes. Yeah. These are all resources to come back to. And it might seem a little jumbled right now, but it makes sense once you start thinking about it and then be thinking about where do I fit in? What is she talking about this application? What is she talking about? So please reach out to us if you need questions beyond the live question and answer. We are try to turn around emails, phone calls within 48 hours.
We are not the CE police. We are here to help you. We won't yell at you for having a, quote, dumb question. There are no dumb questions in NPD. Again, we are not the CE police.
So I love that you say that. So there, just so that you guys know how we go about assessing gaps, figuring out what our learners need, is based on the emails and phone calls that we get.
Yeah.
So this was a need. Like, people didn't realize where they fit in. What does this all look like? This was a need Jessica and I had. Okay. Yeah. So when we first started, Pam made flashcards.
Yes.
With all these words.
We sat at a round table and we went through flashcards because I was brand new to NPD and education in general. I came straight from the ER. And so I'm like, what the heck is accreditation? Why can't you just approve and provide? I mean, it was so many words. And I just remember being told, like, it'll make sense. Just look at these flashcards, like, read the book. And so I did, like, I studied for my job. And now we laugh about it a little bit. But it happened. We had flashcards. So that was a gap that we had. And
that was yeah. Pam's needs assessment on my first day. Like, it was 2 days later. I'm driving home from work. I'm like, oh my God, it was totally a needs assessment. She had me go through those flashcards and she realized where the gaps were, what she needed to concentrate on. And so
I know that when I started, Joe was still here and he gave me the orientation thing that was specific for nurse planners. And he said, go through this and highlight the things that you don't know or that don't make sense to you. And I'm like, okay, well, why can't you just tell me what you want me to know? And now I get it because I'm like, okay, that was totally a different way of doing a needs assessment. And it worked. I mean, we spent time on what I needed to know and kind of went through the other stuff that, you know, maybe I had experience in. So there's different ways to do that.
Yes.
Creatively.
Yes. 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 So the other thing that I want to highlight with this is that it's the providers that award the contact hours. So as an accredited approver, I approve you to go out and provide. You award the contact hours. Sometimes people get confused and think that ONA is awarding the contact hours. No, no, no. You as the provider are awarding the contact hours. Okay, so an accredited approver unit, like we said, operates under primary accreditation criteria. It's led by a nurse peer review leader. So this is myself. So that might be a new term that you've never heard of before, but that's what I'm called in the accredited approver world, and that's the title, is nurse peer review leader. Now, why nurse peer review leader? Well, in order to approve education, I have peer reviewers. So when you are individual activity applicant or an approved provider unit, we have peer reviewers who review your work. So individual activity applicants, a reviewer reviews your work, and then I review it as well, and then give you a decision like, hey, yep, this activity is approved, or hey, we need this, this, and this before it can be approved. Same thing's true for the approved provider unit. So every 3 years, there's a application that's due, and that is reviewed by 2 peer reviewers. And then they tell me what they think meets, doesn't meet criteria. I read through it and I agree or disagree with them. And then I set up a phone call and we discuss through that. So, each application is reviewed and evaluated by a nurse peer reviewer. Nurse peer reviewers, their qualifications to be a nurse peer reviewer is that they are experienced nurse planners. In order to become a nurse peer reviewer, they submit an activity that has been planned, implemented, and evaluated. We talk through that. They get education about being a peer reviewer. And then they are teamed up with a mentor who works with them. Sometimes when folks send me really great applications, either individual activities or approved provider applications, I ask them if they would like to become a peer reviewer. So if this is something that you think you would like to pursue, that this is a really great way to improve your own work as a nurse planner. It's also a great way to give back to your profession. Like I said, we receive a ton. I don't know that we've talked about this yet. So individual activity applicants, we received like 630 in 2018. That's a lot of activity applications. Currently, I think we're at 205 provider units. So you are part of a large community, and it cannot just be Jessica and I here and Sandy. Gosh, we didn't even mention Sandy yet. So those of you who are listening to this, if you haven't emailed Sandy, talk to Sandy. So she's a CE specialist. So she is not a nurse, but she has a breadth of knowledge in CE accreditation criteria. She is awesome.
She was amazing when I first started, and oh my gosh, I don't know how she did it, because I didn't know what the heck was going on, and ONA was in transition, and it was just a hot mess, and Sandy kept me grounded and was like, okay, this is what you need to know. And then when Kelly started, we had more changes, and so she's really kept us together.
Yes. So she is an organizational guru. She's the one who will let you know pieces and parts that you need for your applications. She's the one who sends you the reminder letters. Those of you who are in approved provider units that things are coming up. She helps with payment. She helps with, questions. And then if you have a question specific to accreditation criteria, outcome, disclosure, certification or certificate, anything like that, please send that to me, Kelly. If you have questions related to any activities that we have provided. So for example, hey, you decided, hey, I'd like to get another copy of this, or wait, I wish I would have registered so-and-so for this webinar, things like that. Jessica is the nurse planner that's involved with all of everything that we provide. So those questions would need to go to Jessica. Both Jessica and all 3 of us, Jessica, Sandy, and I, we forward emails to one another. So if you get it in the wrong bucket,
it's fine.
It'll get answered, okay? And it just helps streamline how quickly your questions get answered. So hopefully that was helpful. An approved provider unit. So this is an organization or department devoted to continuing education, nursing, and professional development. If you are new to your approved provider unit, you're a new nurse planner, I really want to encourage you to go to our website and look at the application to become a provider unit. I think that this will really help you understand things that we talk about as we go throughout the weeks. Because if you've only ever planned individual activities, you don't realize the breadth of what an approved provider unit does. There's 3 aspects to an approved provider unit. Structural capacity. Boy, I really butchered that. Structural capacity. I need a little bit more water.
It's Monday.
Yes. Education design process, and then quality outcomes. And so that's a big difference between being an individual activity applicant and an approved provider unit. You're responsible for all those when you're an approved provider unit. As we've said, it operates under ANCC primary accreditation criteria. It's led by a primary nurse planner, or PNP. So the primary nurse planner is ultimately responsible for communicating with ONA, with leading the provider unit, with submitting the application to become an approved provider unit or maintain their approved provider unit. And that's the person that's ultimately accountable to us, the accredited approver. So it's a big job. And I am really, really, really advocate for that being at least a 0.5 FTE. It's a lot of work. You are responsible for orienting nurse planners and maintaining adherence to criteria. You're responsible for evaluating your provider unit and developing quality outcomes and meeting quality outcomes.
And the processes are really important when you're an approved provider unit as opposed to just individual activities. And that itself takes time and organization and a lot of collaboration.
Yeah. So 2 things that I would advocate for is getting a hold of our manual, because that will give you a lot of information about those different things, and also the approved provider unit application. Those of you who are individual activity applicants and are thinking about becoming approved providers, please, please, please go to those resources as well. Okay. So this is what you came for, right? You're like, the whole continuing education and what does it mean? How do I plan activities? We are going to get there. I promise, I promise, I promise. So the one thing that if you walk away with nothing else, walk away with this slide. Continuing education is anything that improves practice or supports the professional development of the nurse or healthcare provider. Therefore, all of these things qualify. We here at ONA, we provide education about advocacy. We provide education about fiduciary responsibility for locals. We provide education on, all kinds of stuff. I'm blanking on another example I had that's usually outside of what most people think is continuing education.
Healthy nurse initiatives, I think, are a good example because they are based on, nurse wellness, not necessarily nursing practice or something you would do to a patient, but it improves your either professional development or self and general wellness, which if you aren't taking care of yourself, you can't take care of people. That can be all continuing education. We have a whole nurse wellness conference, and that is all CE.
Yep. So just take it out of your vocab, the word in service. Okay. I think those of us who have been doing this for a while, because it was a long held mandate prior to 2015. So since 2015, this has been the case, but for some of us, it's been really hard to get our minds wrapped around this. There is no in-service. It doesn't matter if the education is applicable across the country. That used to be another thing, like, oh, I can't just provide education about our IV pump because if somebody came in from another organization, it wouldn't apply to them. Doesn't matter. If your learners need the education and you've identified a gap, you have an outcome, you have a reason for giving that education, you meet all accreditation criteria, you can award contact hours.
And it can be short.
It can be short. You don't have to adhere to any more that it has to be at least a half an hour. Now, as far as your time, planning activities and awarding contact hours, I'd probably stick around 15 minutes. I think awarding contact hours for something that's like 5 minutes would be really hard. So I'm a big believer in serial education. So for example, I have identified a need with IVs. So I have problems with insertion. I have problems with dressings. I have problems with maintaining all kinds of things. So maybe those could be 4 different sessions, 15 minutes each. So maybe my experienced nurse doesn't need insertion. She's great at inserting, but she doesn't know anything about this new dressing that we now have. So she needs to come to that second one, or she needs to come to the charting one because we just had a new EHR and no one is charting IVs right. I know this was a huge problem at my old place. Like charting I's and O's on our new EHR was impossible and we weren't doing it right at all. So that might help for you when you're like, wait, I don't want to just award one certificate for 0.25. Well, maybe you have a series and then people come to some and not others. And so some people will get 1 contact hour and some will get 0.25. We can talk about that till the cows come home. But believe me, any questions you have about this, like, hey, I didn't think this was...
It probably is.
It probably is. I have not had anybody ask me and me say no. Other than the accreditation criteria that there cannot be any conflict of interest. So if the only way to teach that new IV dressing is from the organization that, is from the company that developed the dressing, so the BARD or whatever it is that your IV dressing comes from, you can't award contact hours then, okay? So, but what you can do is you can have the BARD rep come teach you, and then you go out and teach. And then there's no conflict of interest.
And don't worry, we'll talk about conflict of interest again.
If your head is spinning. Yeah. But that's just a little primary to think about. Like, okay, we have this new insulin, or we have this new IV pump, or we have this new something. And yes, the manufacturer is the go-to. They were able to teach it well. They've got great education plan. Okay, you just can't award contact hours for that. But maybe what you can do is a train the trainer. So they train you, and then you, without any conflict of interest, because you do not work for that manufacturer, you can go out and you can just give as much education as you want and award contact hours on that new pump, EHR, whatever it is. Okay, so we said a little bit about this. So this is those words for you that I talked about earlier: structural capacity, educational design criteria, and quality outcomes. So structural capacity is the foundation. So just like we've been talking about today, the foundation for your continuing education work. So structural capacity talks about what are your learner needs. What's the primary nurse planner's commitment to learner needs? That's structural capacity 1. Structural capacity 2 is how do you orient nurse planners and maintain accreditation criteria? And then the structural capacity 3 is how does the primary nurse planner provide guidance to others who plan, implement, and evaluate activities? So the important thing to remember is that the primary nurse planner isn't only responsible for the nurse planners, but also anyone else that's within that activity. So your content experts, your authors, maybe if you need it, a content reviewer. So how does that primary nurse planner provide guidance to those other individuals? Maybe the primary nurse planner provides guidance to the CNO, because the CNO is saying all the time, we need butts in a seat because this is happening. But you, if you think back to our model, when you're looking at your learners and you're assessing needs, it's not about that the nurses don't know, it's that the nurses can't because the material isn't there. Yeah, the nurses can't be in full PPE because our shipment didn't come in and we don't have any. Like, it's not a learner need, it's a process need. So that's structural capacity. Next is educational design. So this is the 7 steps of educational design, from assessing a need all the way through implementing and all those things that we need in order to implement, such as learner engagement strategies, best available evidence, absence of conflict of interest, to evaluation. How do you use summative evaluation in order to assess what's needed in your continuing education work? And then quality outcomes. How do you go about assessing your provider unit? What's your process for assessing your provider unit? What are your goals for the upcoming year? Please, 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 if you're watching this at the beginning of the year, actually anytime, have goals. What are your quality outcome goals? Do you want to have more activities about a certain topic? Do you need a different space? Do you need more nurse planners? Do you need, we set up a speakers bureau as one of the things that we did. And then the final quality outcome is related to nursing professional development. What are you doing for nursing professional development? This is what we're doing. Yes, it has activities, but we also do other work to train and develop nurse planners. Like I said, we're available by phone, we're available by email. We also are big advocates for certification. This year we're assessing our primary nurse planners and whether or not they're certified. And we're going to do some work to hopefully move that needle a little bit towards more primary nurse planners becoming certified. So that's the whole quality outcomes piece. So these are the 3 things that need to be in place in order to have an approved provider unit. And these are the 3 things that are continually assessed and worked on. So different examples of structures that that approved provider units might have. So this one on the left is pretty much how ours is. So we have a primary nurse planner. I told you earlier that Sandy's title was CE specialist. The other title for folks in that role, which some of you might consider an admin role, is professional development associate. This is another specialty that ANPD is advocating for, and they've even opened up membership to non-nurses who are in that professional development associate role. They have developed competencies.
Yeah, that's great.
There are workshops at convention for professional development associates. They provide webinars. They do a lot of work. They really understand, as Pam Dickerson would say, that professional development associates are the glue that keeps our provider units together. And I know a lot of you are working without them, and I don't know how you do it.
I don't know. I just don't know.
She's the one who keeps us all together. Like, Jessica and I will plan activities and we'll conferences, and then Sandy will be like, oh, here's the quotes for the different caterers. Oh, yeah, we need to feed these people. And I'm not saying that's all she does, but she does all kinds of other things to keep us. But that was just the example recently. I'm like, oh, yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
She's good at reminding us of things like, hey, you might want to look at this thing you have coming up, or the food, or hey, did you call that person? And I'm like, oh my gosh, Sandy, thank God.
Yes.
Because it's, especially when Kelly and I were new, she was really great about knowing what needed to be done and when we should start doing certain things. And so that was super helpful. And we're just very grateful for her in that role.
Yeah. What I love about the model on the right, though, is it seems more collaborative between the primary nurse planners and the nurse planners. And there's just not a space there for the PD associate. But however your structure is, and I've seen folks who they have like their overall organizational structure, and nurse planners are throughout the organization. I get that, but still there's some type of collaboration. There needs to be leadership from the primary nurse planner. That doesn't mean you need to be their boss. I've had lots of primary nurse planners who their boss is actually just a nurse planner. Because that department manager, director, whatever, has many hats, but still wants to be a nurse planner, but doesn't want the responsibility of leading the provider unit as well. So I've seen some of that flipped. If you have any questions or thoughts about this, please reach out to me. And both of these are great examples that you can use in your application, and you can steal them. Okay, just steal it. Just use it if that's what your structure is. So what's the role and responsibility of the provider units is to determine who the primary nurse planner and the nurse planners are, obviously adhering to accreditation criteria. So all those things that are needed in order to be able to award contact hours, also structural capacity and quality outcomes, to implement the standards of practice and performance. So this goes back to your NPD practice and performance standards. And then also to contribute to the professional development of colleagues. So this is Q03. What have you done for nursing professional development? So what I love about this that ANCC has advocated for is that we're not just in a vacuum within ourselves and our offices and in our departments, but what about the overall professional development of nurses? And what are we doing to advocate for that and have quality outcomes related to nursing professional development? So here's the qualifications for a primary nurse planner. Both primary nurse planners and nurse planners are to have an active unencumbered nursing license and a minimum of a baccalaureate degree in nursing. And then, like we said, they are responsible for the oversight and the accountability of the approved provider unit. They provide guidance and support for nurse planners. They set and measure the goals for the APU. Whereas the nurse planner, like I said, same qualifications, and then they are to plan, implement, and evaluate professional development opportunities, and also contribute to the success of the approved provider unit. I was so encouraged the other day, as you may or may not know, if you've had an application recently or if you're having an application in the future as an approved provider, I set up what's called a virtual visit after your application has been reviewed. And I always tell primary nurse planners, please feel free to invite anyone that you would like in your approved provider unit. And sometimes approved provider units only have a one-woman show or a one-man show. I totally get it. But sometimes they have 20, 30 nurse planners, and it's just myself and this primary nurse planner talking. And it's like, wait, maybe your examples would have been better had you had your nurse planners collaborate with you on this. Or do you really know how well your nurse planners are planning, implementing, and evaluating activities? What's your role with them? But I was super encouraged this week. I sent out an invite to a PNP, and I think I have 10 nurse planners scheduled on this call. So it'll be really super fun to get to know some of them, and also just to encourage that primary nurse planner, like, wow, it seems like you have great collaboration, with your nurse planners. So just a thought. Nurse planners, you are so important. And then two, what I'd like to advocate for with these two slides is primary nurse planners, set up a succession plan. All this education that we're giving today about approved provider units, share that in your nurse planner orientation. I know when I was oriented as a nurse planner, as far as I can remember, all the work was related to planning, implementing, and evaluating activities, which is completely important and needed by nurse planners. I had no idea about the broader scope of our provider unit and what we were doing and what we were accomplishing. I didn't know about structural capacity or quality outcomes. And so it would have been helpful to know that. And then two, it sets up more success for if you leave, say you win the lottery. Or what's happened a lot over the last year is aging parents, things that get you called away, sick kids, whatever it is, that there's someone who can pick up the baton and start running. Now, that being said, if you are one of those primary nurse planners who didn't have a great succession plan and you're new, I'm here for you. I will help you. We will navigate through this, I promise. Okay. So educational design criteria. So this is that whole bucket, and we're just going to give an overview today, and the next session is going to get more into the down and dirty. But the first thing you need to do is assess. So just like any nursing process, you're going to assess what is the problem. And maybe your planning committee starts here. Maybe you're alone in this. Maybe you might want to invite some people to help you assess, but you're looking at what is the problem? How do we know this is an issue? What could be done better? So this is also known as the gap, but I think it's a lot easier to talk about it as the problem. And as Jessica says, don't make it hard.
Don't make it hard. When I was new, I was trying to make it hard, and it's really, really not. It may seem overwhelming, but really it's about what is the problem? What really are you trying to fix, or what's not happening, or what is happening? That's what you're looking for.
Yep. And then you need to do the work of determining whether education is the right fix. And this is why I love that model, right? Because this is where you're doing more work than just providing a class. You are investigating, like I said, that example with the PPE. Maybe it's not that the nurses don't know how to use it or aren't using it right. It's that they don't have enough. Like I said, there's a great example in the core of this where, the NPD practitioner goes out and asks the charge nurses, hey, I hear that so-and-so wasn't wearing PPE with taking care of that patient this weekend. And she's like, we didn't have any. I called supply, there wasn't any. So then the NPD practitioner worked with supply to get the PAR levels up, to get the equipment that the nurses needed. Didn't require a class.
Or if it does require education, figuring out what kind of gap it is. Is it that people don't know how to do the thing? Or do they not have that fundamental education? Do they not know? Or is there a bigger practice issue involved there? It's education like this is not one size fits all. It's not going to be the same type every time.
That's right. So once you might get to the level of educational need, and this is where the planning committee. So how do you know they don't know? How do you know that they don't know how to? So this might be stakeholders, or maybe you've done a survey with the learners, or maybe it's observation by the CNS that, hey, she went out and did all this education, but she's not seeing it in practice. So is there more education needed? Maybe it needs it at the level of the bedside. Sometimes we can have these great classes in the auditorium, but then no one actually goes and implements it because they can't figure out how to do that within their space. Yeah. And then determining the desired outcome and the measurement criteria. So a measurable learning outcome, like we had at the beginning of this. you will identify one standard of practice. You will
Measurable.
describe how you're going to implement one standard of practice. So it's measurable. Either you do it or you don't. And we're hoping that 100% of you do it. That's our outcome that we want. So this is not objectives, and we'll talk about this more next session. Objectives are for the speaker. This is not that. This is an outcome. So what do you want the learners to have when they walk out the door? A lot of you might be able to have long-term outcomes, changing Indian QI data, things like that. No. This is, what do you want when they leave the door? What will be accomplished, and how will you measure it?
Specific to that activity. You know, like Kelly said, you can have the long-term goals and outcomes, but when you're figuring out the measurable outcome, it's specific to that activity and that actual education.
Yep. And then these are the 7 educational design criteria: selecting the target audience, developing content based on best available evidence, learner engagement, determining the criteria for successful completion and evaluation, implementing the activity, evaluating the activity, and completing a summative evaluation. And we'll talk more about each of those in depth in the upcoming sessions. But I think we are realizing that we are coming to the end of our time. But just to be clear, so with each of these are all accreditation criteria and have specific things related to each one of them. So, for example, when you determine the criteria for successful completion and the evaluation method, well, then when you evaluate the activity, did you meet those? So they all line up very well. And then that completing a summative evaluation, just real quick, like that's a quick paragraph from the nurse planner. Did you meet the outcome? How did the activity go? What's your planning for the next time? And like I say, we will talk about all these more in depth. So like I said, we will discuss all these in upcoming sessions. We're going to talk about adult learning principles. What do we know about learning? Our role as facilitators of learning, and then the mechanics, the ins and outs of what we just overviewed with the planning, implementing, and evaluating. And then also how to best document this. So I think the documentation is sometimes a barrier for folks. We're going to try to take that barrier away. Jessica and I planned this in 15 minutes. You know, really from the beginning to the end, we planned this activity. We knew our outcome. We knew what we wanted to do, engagement strategies, all those kinds of things. It can be that simple. I think what's important is to have that activity doc in front of you when you begin the planning. I think the problem that happens is we have all this in our head.
You have to go back.
You have to go back.
It's not the most effective way to do it at all. We have the activity doc open on our laptops, and as we're having a conversation talking about something we want to do, I'm putting in the information, and boom, it's done. It's that simple.
It is that simple. So what's your value? Why does your organization have an approved provider unit? What does your APU contribute to the organization, and what role do you play? So a lot of you who are in magnet organizations, there is a strong need for ANCC accredited continuing education within magnet organizations. This is your ability to provide education to increase your certification levels. This is your ability to assess learner needs and meet learner needs. And what do you contribute to the organization? This is when you need to be looking at that quality outcomes piece. You know, what are we doing? How much education are we providing? What are we doing? Are things changing? Has our happy rate decreased? Well, why is that? Well, we just put all new folks through this new education and started these great dressings to prevent pressure ulcers, whatever that is. Be thinking about what do you do and how do you, as either a primary nurse planner or a nurse planner, contribute to the success of that approved provider unit. And then how do you communicate your value? Do you have an elevator speech? Do you even know what I'm talking about? This is the 2-minute speech where if you got stuck on an elevator with your CNO or your director or whoever that is, communicating what you're currently doing and what your value to the organization is. So it's short, it's specific, it's relevant. So Maybe you're providing evidence-based education, whatever focus you have, addressing educational needs and improving practice. Maybe it's your support for certification, either magnet, pathway to excellence, and then also talking about how NPD is a specialty in that you are a needed part of your organization, that you are not an item to be cut on the budget. And why is that? Because you contribute to all of these things, EVP, magnet, whatever that might be. Maybe it's just the professional development of your organization. What does your turnover rate look like in your organization? What are you doing to address that? What are you doing to address nurse burnout? I really suggest that you have these, you practice them, you talk through a colleague about them. I have to give an email each week to my director about what we've accomplished in our department. I make sure that is short and sweet and is advocating for our value within our organization and how we're meeting the needs of the nurses that we serve. So maybe get in a habit of that. Like, what would I write to my boss each week about what I did this week? So now the time to evaluate yourself. Look at your answers earlier and see if anything has changed. Are you better able to describe your role as a nurse planner or explain how education has improved nursing practice or helped nurses grow? Are you able to describe the importance of certification in NPD? Hopefully the needle has moved a little bit, and if not, we'll talk about it. So to prepare for next week, these are the readings that would be really great if you took the time to do. Look at Scope and Standards, pages 29 through 33, the core chapters 7, 9, 11. And like I said, we're going to be talking a lot more about education design criteria next week. So assessing practice gaps, learning needs assessments, and developing outcomes measures. So we are really grateful that you have joined us, and please shoot us an email with any questions. Like I said, our website is www.ohnurses.org. Look, it's right there, right at the bottom of your screen there.
And www.ce4nurses.org for more fun CE.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks. Have a great day, guys.